it's going to be another week and a half. I'll get a passport and we'll go to Haifa. Well, 2 days later, he has a passport. By the end of the week, he's on a plane and he comes to Yerushalayim. He comes to Yerushalayim, and my cousin Chaim David Ackerman takes him to Rabbi Paysach Krohn. Rabbi Paysach Krohn wanted to meet two of these people. That's all I've been hearing for the last 6 months. And they all travel up to Haifa. Now, my father was a very sensitive and edel person, so he didn't want to be the first one to see Rav Shalom. Let his wife see him and the children, and he stood off by the side. So this I told my sister at the shiva. I didn't even know this. After the Rebbetzin and the children greeted Rav Shalom, so the Rebbetzin says to Rav Shalom, your best friend is here to greet you. So Rav Shalom says, don't be silly, my best friend is in America. And of course then, my father came out, and of course they embraced, and they spent a wonderful, wonderful week and a half, which included the Yom Tov of Shavuos together. But what they could not realize was that that would be the last time that they would see each other. Because when my father came back from that trip, he unfortunately became ill, and within a year, he had passed away. And all of a sudden, the house that was such a center of attention and such a center of everything that was going on, all of a sudden was quiet and still and sad. It was Gehenna on this earth. That's when I publicly became a moil. My father had taught me before. And it was very, very difficult, besides everything else, the oldest of 7 children, to suddenly have to leave the yeshiva and support a mother and 6 brothers and sisters. And a few months later, we got a letter. We got a letter from Rav Shalom, and he said he'd like to come back to America, and he wanted to have permission if he could come and stay with us. And we were shocked. Because by that time already, so many people and so many communities in America knew him. He could stay any place. And besides, what does it look like? A royal from Eretz Yisrael, a big tzaddik is going to come and live in the house with an almana and with Yisraelim. But that's the first lesson that we have to learn from him. Agra de hespeda deluye. We have to take from this hesped and draw out what it means to have a koras hatayv. Rav Shalom could have stayed any place. But this was the family that housed him and took care of him when nobody knew him. And so therefore, in recognition of that, al takoras hatoiv, he decided that this was the place that he would always be. And there was another thing. He understood what it means to be sensitive to an almana and yisayim. When he was 7 years old, his father passed away. And all his life, he felt the pain of being a yasam. When he was 60 years old, he once had to give a gift to a bar mitzvah boy who was never a yasam. And Rav Shalom inscribed the sefer with his beautiful handwriting, and after he wrote his name, he added 2 words: Kamoini, kamoicha. Just like you are, that's what I am. Just like you are a yasam, that's what I am. And he came back to the house because he knew that he would be able to give chizuk to an almana and yisayim. How many of us here know people that are in that condition? The shiva is easy because everybody comes. But what happens 5 months, 6 months, 7 months afterwards? The loneliness, the depression, the sadness sets in when people go back to their regular way of life and people stop calling. That's what we have to remember. The agra, the hespeda, the luye, what we have to draw is to feel the pain of those that no longer have what we have. And so when Rav Shalom heard from us that of course we would be honored and thrilled for him to come, he wrote us and he told us when he's coming. And I remember we all went to the boat to greet him. I came, my brothers and sisters, and my mother, and we all came to that port on the west side of Manhattan. And he came off the boat, and it was a very huge lobby. And in the distance, he was a big, heavy man, and he walked with a cane. Of course, my brothers and I, we recognized him at once. And we ran up to him. And then when he saw that we were coming, and he saw my mother, he sat down on the first bench that he saw, and he just cried. He sat there, and he cried. He didn't say a word. And that cry And that obvious pain for a man who could speak millions of words, but suddenly had no words, only the pain that was so obvious, that was the greatest nachama to all of us. And if I will live to 120, I'll never forget him sitting with his hands on his cane and just shaking his head back and forth, looking at the almana of his close friend. But he came to our home, and he became like a father and a grandfather. And everything that went on in the family, to the outside world, he was the person that was funny, who was the person that was inspirational. But to us, he was an integral part of the family. You know, there's a very famous pasuk. We all know the pasuk, and throughout Klal Yisrael, we sing this pasuk as well. It's in Tehillim Kuf Lamed Gimel. How wonderful, how beautiful it is when brothers get together. And the Gemara says that that's referring to Moshe and Aaron, who got along so beautifully. And then the next pasuk says, like the great oil, the good oil that Moshe poured down on the head of Aaron HaKohen when he made him the Kohen Gadol. Yered al Zakan, it came down on his beard. Zakan Aaron, Sheyered al Pibidosav, the oil went all the way down to the hem of his clothes. The Mashal in Yud Beis, Amud Beis, and Hurriyah touches a different shot in that pasuk. He says, why did Moshe Rabbeinu choose Aaron to be the Kohen Gadol? Why did he give him the greatest position in Klal Yisrael? You know why? The Mashal writes, Ki hu haya shalem b'midos yosem mikol adam. Because Aaron had the greatest and the finest midos more than anyone. And he says that's the shot in the pasuk. Like that great oil that came down on his head, Yered al Zakan. Zakan Aaron, why? Sheyered, why did it come down on his head? Al Pibi Doisa. Because he had the finest midas. Because he had the finest character. That's why he was the Kohen Gadol. To us, and to many who knew him, Rav Shalom was the Kohen Gadol of his generation. Let me tell you some of the remarkable midas that nobody knew about him. This is a story that I never told while he was alive, certainly not in public. He came to us numerous times over Pesach. Now imagine, he has a family, but he's coming here in America, and here in America, or in England, in Europe, wherever, we all have 2 days, we have 2 Siddharim. But people who come from Eretz Yisrael, they have only one Seder. And all the women surely know that when Motzei Shabbos is the first Seder, the Seder starts very, very late. Because you can't make any preparations. The karpas, the zaltzwasser, all the hachanas, you're not allowed to do that on Shabbos because as a matter, you're even eating challah Shabbos in the morning. So you can't get anything ready. And Shabbos night, the Seder starts very late. So this particular year, Rav Shalom was with us, and the Seder started very late. And some of my brothers-in-law were there with their children, so that's my mother's grandchildren. And I don't have to tell you, these days the kids come home with enough pshatim. By the time they finish Avodah Mayinum, it's 11:30. Everybody's got a million pshatim, and everybody's telling all the divrei Torah. And I'm going crazy, because I know that Avshalom never missed eating the Afikonim before Chatzos. And it's getting very late, very quickly. And this is the only Seder that he has. Because tomorrow night, it's Ois Yonta for him. So I'm beginning to rush. And he says to me, Ayal Zachnit, don't rush. And I try to tell him, Rav Shalom, cook up the Zega. Ayal Zachnit, don't rush. Fine. So when he's not looking, at least I thought he was not looking, I say to my mother, Ma, bring the food. I didn't get it on the melech, right? So I tell my mother. What?
So to give a short introduction, security has advised and asked us desperately 2 cars. 3 big cars, 3 cars. Mazda, is it? Registration?
To say there, and Rav Shalom catches me telling my mother to rush the food. And he says to me again, Al Zachnit. And therefore I have no choice. And it turns out that by the time the Seder is finished, it's well after Chatzos. And by the time we came to the Afikoman, Rav Shalom, for the first time in his life, ate the Afikoman after Chatzos. So well after the Seder. after Shirim and all. I go over to Rav Shalom and I said, Rav Shalom, it's Betzach and Shulikin. I apologize. I know you're so makbid on Shiurim and on Zmanim, and I know this is the first time that you didn't eat the Afikoyim before Chatzos. Listen to what he told me. Let's never forget this comment. Agra de Hespega Deluya. He says to me, what does your mother wait for a whole year? She waits that the children and grandchildren should come to the Seder. That is also in Divrei Torah. That the whole family is together. I'm going to rush her Seder because I have to do my mitzvah. Being Mitzayir and Almona is a deraisa. Eating the Afikoyim before the Chatzos is a Drabbana. Who would think of that? Ich darf tun my mitzvah. So forget about the world. No. You don't impose your frumkeit on somebody else's cheshbon. This is a family. This is an almana that waits all year for this. And you're going to push her quickly because you have to finish your mitzvah? Even though he knows tomorrow night there's another Seder. But there's nothing like the first Seder. We all know that. Everybody's waiting for that. Agra de Hespeda de Luyek. We have to draw from this midah of this hesped of Rav Shalom to understand that you don't impose your frumkeit on somebody else's cheshbon. Your derabanan is not as important as somebody else's deraisa. Here's another thing. Again, nobody knew this about him. I had a friend that was involved in a camp. It's great advice for everybody. Don't be involved in a business with partners. Most of the time, it's going to end in machlokas. So these three guys, they opened up a camp, and after 2 years, two guys ganged up on one guy, and they want to get rid of him. The best thing, even if you make less money, be your own boss. So what happens is, these two guys, they want to get rid of this person. And this person is very close to me. He says to me, what should I do? I said, go to Rav Shalom. Rav Shalom's here in town. So he goes to Rav Shalom. And he says, Rav Shalom, we're in such a machlokes. We all started the camp together. Now these two guys want to get rid of me. What should I do? Amazing. Rav Shalom takes out his wallet. And from his wallet, he takes out a piece of paper. And on this piece of paper, he has a letter written that was printed in a sefer that the Rambam wrote to his son. It's called Igeres HaMusar LeRabbi Avraham Benoi. Listen to what the Rambam writes to his son about machlokes. Al tishabtzu es nafshei seichem b'machlokes. Don't defile your lives, your soul with machlokes. Hamachala haguf that destroys the body, v'han nefesh and the soul, v'han momen and your money, u'manishar oid, and what's left. And then he writes something, I just want to read it to you in beautiful Hebrew poetry, and then I'll translate in English. Ra'isi, the Rambam says, I have seen, Levainim hushcharu, mishpachos misfachu, v'sorim husaru megadlusam, v'ayoros gedolos nisaru, v'kibutzim nifredu, v'chasidim nifsedu, v'anshei amuna ovdu, v'nechbodim niglu v'nisbazu v'sivos hamachloikes. I have seen light-complexioned people become dark. Families become afflicted. Princes removed from their prominence. Cities desolated. Groups split asunder. Respectable people embarrassed and humiliated because of arguments. Don't we know families that are ripped apart because of machlokes? And half of the machlokes sometimes are things that are not worth arguing about. Business partners, communities, shuls, Klal Yisrael. So much things to machlokes. What do you think the reason is why Mashiach is not here yet? We can't get along with each other. We're fighting the Goyim, but we fight each other 10 times worse. I learned two things from this incident. One, keep away from machlokes, and this guy Taka walked away from the camp. But I learned another thing from here. Here, Rav Shalom learned something from the Rambam. And he took it, and he wrote it on a card, and he kept it with him at all times. How many times do we learn a pasuk in Mishlei? Or do we learn a Maimer in Mesilas Yesharim? Or we learn a Chazal, Agadata, and somehow we feel that Chazal is talking to us. Everybody has different psukim that somehow are talking to you. Take that Chazal, write it on a card, put it in your wallet with a double kisi so there's no problems wherever you walk. Put it in your purse and keep it with you. Make it part of you. And then when that situation comes up, you'll remember once or twice when you need it. that this is part of